I know what you're thinking. Who is this and what have you done with my Granblue fantasy game? Well, today guys, I'm going to be doing a showcase for Ghandagoza, but in the best way that I know possible, aka while doing it as Vern. Now, before we get into the guide on exactly how you should be playing Vern or Ghandagoza, I do want to make a quick PSA that number one, I am going to be releasing an infographic and some information about Ghandagoza just in case you don't have enough time to watch the whole video. So check that out either in the description or maybe I'll post it on screen. But let's get into the weapon section for Ghandagoza. So as with all weapons, guys, you're usually mulling between critical rate and critical damage and the awakening weapon until you have access to the Terminus set. But keep in mind that especially with Ghandagoza, because of the way that his kit works, a lot of people believe that it is actually somewhat more worth it to again upgrade the Ascension weapon that gives you health, just because ultimately sometimes you have to just stand there and get hit. And since he's got such long animations, roll up times, and kind of charge times to do some of his skills, it doesn't hurt, especially early on before your Terminus, to give yourself a little bit of health. That being said, and as a general PSA, I am not saying to, spec a lot into health, especially for the build that I'm going to be showing you today, which is the Giga Chad full DPS Ghandagoza build. Now, in terms of skills, there is a skill that you could, again, swap out if you want to be able to play a bit more aggressively or a bit more selfishly. But starting with what we have right now, and again, this is kind of the case for most characters in Granblue Fantasy, you have the Gap Closer ability, which is, again, a fast lunge attack in the form of Iron Shoulder. This one, in my opinion, you really shouldn't be moving, especially because you can kind of pair Iron Shoulder into a combo, or you can do something later that I'll explain with dodge canceling in order to get out your Eternal Rage hits better and more efficiently. R-Hat Skybreaker is one of your highest damage skills, and outside of the Eternal Rage DPS combo that I'll kind of explain later, this is one of the skills that is also really non-negotiable when it comes to swapping it out, just because of how high of a damage ratio it has. But keep in mind that it does have a bit of animation, lag to it because you're flying in the sky and you're hitting. And the next skill that is worth mentioning is True Avidya, and ultimately, since it does give you the attack boost, and he's actually not that easy to damage cap on, it is kind of worth it to have this skill. And since it gives attack to everyone and certain characters also don't end up capping, namely, again, characters like Cannaaaa or someone like Vasaraga, it is worth having. And ultimately, that isn't even taking into consideration how good increasing Ghandagoza's Eternal Rage is. Long story short, increasing Ghandagoza's Eternal Rage is really good for increasing his DPS, so take things that involve that. Now, the next skill that we have is Infernal Stomp, and the reason why this one is so impactful, number one, is because it does damage, but it is also a slow. Now, the name of the game in some cases when it comes to Granblue Fantasy is slowing or bypassing or allowing certain phases to be one shot or kind of blitz through easier through CC. But long story short, if you don't want to take the Stomp and you want to take Eternal Rage, you can just instantly max out his Eternal Rage with this skill. It kind of depends on the content that you're clearing though, whether that's a score attack or if it's a boss, or again, if you are calculated in doing this with friends. Infernal Stomp is a skill that you would take out in case you wanted to take the other or any of the other skills for whatever reason, i.e. namely something like, again, the parry and counter if you feel like countering for some reason or running tank, wanting stout hard, hostility, anything like this. Jammed is deceptively good just because depending on how low you are, again, you increase attack, but you don't really want to be too low when it comes to a lot of these characters. You don't have some undying passive like Vasaraga. And although gaining 100% attack would help with capping some of your damage things, it would just make more sense to run something like Combo Booster or some other damage sigil to compensate for this. Finally, if you're really afraid of dying or getting one shot, you can take Diana, but this is arguably his worst. Now, it would have been helpful to put this section at the very beginning, but I'm a Pepega, and honestly, I'm a little distracted by Vern's big muscular, muscular physique. But in any case, the way that Ghandagoza works is that Ghandagoza's Raging Fist charges faster and deals more damage based on his Eternal Rage. Combo finishers and link attacks gather Eternal Rage. So, in other words, the more that you hit or the more damage that you deal or the more punches that you get off, the more Eternal Rage that you get and the more damage that you do. Furthermore, if you look at the second skill down here, which I will move, I apologize, I just realized my camera's here. Enter the Fist reads that it enhances perfectly timed left click or normal attack attacks when they are chained in a combo. So what that means for this character is that if you're familiar with the Gears of War reload mechanic where you have to perfectly time things, or if you've ever played any rhythm game, some taiko drum type beat, timing things perfectly is kind of the name of the game for Ghandagoza, and you'll see later why it's super important and just how difficult it is at times, which actually makes Ghandagoza one of, in my opinion, the hardest characters that I've ever tried to master. But before we move on, I do want to just, again, give a special shout out to Maggie for, again, having this damage calculator. Of course, if you want to find this damage calculator or anything relating to this, I'll include the link to this. But the reason why I really like this specific chart is because, again, you could see the overcaps, the damage potential, how much damage you're doing with certain skills. Ultimately, although it does look a little convoluted and looks a little jam-packed, and you're probably trying to figure out what I'm trying to explain with what I'm showing here, what I'm actually trying to show is just how impactful or just how high scaling some of these skills skills do in terms of damage, but also how hard it is to reach their peak potential when it comes to running damage sigils to reach the cap. Now, if you'll notice, you have things like the uncharged raged fist. Now, if you take a look at the road that I have here, you can see that there is a 10 rage uncharged normal attack, or like, you know, the punch combo. And this is one of the hardest skills, or one of the hardest combos to damage cap on. And while that is uncapped, it literally says that it's at 56% of its total max damage. So again, you could get, you know, 44% max or more damage to, I guess, like max out this damage. Take a look at every other category or column that this is in. You have skills like his third auto that are 700% overcapped. And the reason why I'm bringing this all up is because, number one, if you don't reach cap on certain skills, sometimes, guys, it's just not worth it. I didn't really show what the build was on this specific combo, but I have stuff like quick charge, I have concentrated, I have stamina, tyranny, combo booster, all the sub damages, max crit rate. If it wasn't meant to be, guys, it was not meant to be. So in that case, sometimes overcapping or trying to reach the max cap when it comes to skills is kind of ridiculous or just not worth it. But the other thing that I wanted to talk about specifically with the section is just kind of highlighting how important certain skills are, or how important it is to land certain skills. For instance, as I mentioned before, we have our hat breaker right here, and it's a 1000% skill ratio, even though it should be like a multiplier. And if you compare it to something like Infernal Stomp, which only has a 300%, you can understand why the damage, and you can also see the actual damage ratio over here, or in terms of how much damage it does on a crit. And if you look over here, you can see just how much damage it actually does with the crit. In this case, the Infernal Stomp only does 512,000, whereas our hat Skybreaker ends up doing 1.7 million damage, which is absolutely insane. But none of these are nearly as important, and again, kind of a spoiler for the whole game plan of Ghandagoza, which is, again, trying to get max Rage Fist, because if you take a look at a 10 rage normal combo hit, so a Raging Fist hit, it has a 4,040 skill ratio. I don't have to tell you how crazy that is, but that is literally a 6.9 million hit at max cap, and that has got to be your bread and butter. Now, getting to this point is obviously difficult, and I definitely do think that a lot of people underrate Ghandagoza, just because getting to this phase, kind of like with Vasaraga, is a little bit difficult. But if you do manage to hit that upper ceiling and try to kind of break the damage potential, or the total potential that you have when it comes to this character, he does a lot of damage. I'll include a run of it later, but there was literally a 41 or I think 42 million Ghandagoza run that was recorded recently on the score dummy, and ultimately, if you're able to do 42 million to the dummy, that already puts you ahead of a lot of characters, i.e. someone like Lancelot. I think that ties or gets equal to someone like Narmaya. You're already beating characters like Yorha, you know, Catalina, etc., etc., at least with the tech and the information that we have so far. Enough with all the nonsense when it comes to skills and skill cap damage, though. Let's talk about masteries. So if you aren't already familiar with it, a lot of these characters in the game are basically kind of cookie cutter in terms of what you would want for your overmastery. Having max crit is a huge plus. Maxing out your normal attack damage is also really good, and arguably your third and fourth slot are the kind of overmasteries that you can adjust or swap depending on what your build is. But in our case, what you're looking for is a skill damage cap up at 20%, and then either something like stun power, or you're looking for something like flat attack, skill damage up, skybound damage up. Either of these are fine, but I do want to make notice that, again, I've seen a couple people say that they are running something like skybound art damage cap up, which again makes no real sense. And even though I have it myself here, I'm actually just doing it because this is the only crit rate up that I got. But it is actually very, very unrealistic to even hit the skybound art damage cap in any case, so not really worth it. I would definitely take either the stun power or the period instead of the cap. So in any case, happy rolling, guys. Hope you get everything that you want out of your outer mastery. Let's move on. Okay, now sigils are somewhat complex because, again, it kind of depends on what build you're running or what you're looking for, but just ignore the 95% crit rate, because ultimately, you know, it should be 100, but I just don't have, you know, 1,010 vitality right stones, and I also don't have infinite mastery points, so 95% will have to do. But ultimately, in terms of his build style or his play style, I do really like having stuff like Stout Heart, because again, sometimes you just have to face tank, or you're charging, or you're just hitting. But you have your usual suspects here with the sub damage 5s, the War Elemental, maxing out your damage cap. But I do want to make a special shout out for the sigils that you do actually need specific to Ghandagoza, and in my opinion, that is going to be his Eternal Rage Ethos, which if you read it, it says that it increases your damage cap by 50%. Huge. And then finally, this skill, Improved Dodge. Now, you wouldn't expect it from a character, again, that is using something like Stout, and ultimately, if you want, you can get rid of Stout alongside Steel Nerves. Improved Dodge is actually really, really important if you want to have a kind of bypass, skip the line kind of a skill that you're going to do when it comes to Ghandagoza. Again, I'll explain it a bit more in depth later in the gameplay section, explaining how exactly you're supposed to play Ghandagoza, but just know that having this is really, really important because you want to dodge a lot, and so therefore, there is literally nothing better than Improved Dodge for your consistent or your increased number of dodges, because we're not even necessarily looking for the iframes, we're literally looking for consecutive dodges in a row so that we can do a weird mechanic or an interesting, like, good mechanic when it comes to Ghandagoza. But aside from that, you have everything else that you would imagine from this build. You have stamina, you have tyranny, you have the war elemental, damage cap is maxed. I don't know for sure how much I'd actually want cascade, but that's just kind of how the, you know, the cookie crumbles. In terms of my build, I honestly would not have wanted combo finisher as much as I would have preferred, I guess, something like, maxing out the cascade if I'm going to be using it, or something like guts or tyranny, just because sometimes it does feel like, especially in gameplay. But assuming that you're running something a bit more well balanced, especially for runs that are actually against bosses and not just against score attack, consider again running stuff like Stout Heart, or consider something like Nimble Onslaught, especially if you are going to be dodging a lot. But just know that a lot of the times when you're dodging or when you're trying to play this Ghandagoza character, you're using a lot of these dodges specifically to rev up for your perfect combo and do as much damage as possible. As a parting final note, I do want to also mention that, like I had mentioned earlier about his damage caps, getting him to damage cap is pretty difficult. So if you do find that in this case, if you don't want to use something like Stout Heart and you don't feel like you have enough room for it, you can change something out like the Stout Heart and the Steel Nerves that I have here on my Tyranny for double Nimble Onslaught, and then, you know, run something like Combo Booster instead to kind of increase like your total damage capacity. But just keep in mind that hitting damage cap on all of his skills is pretty unrealistic, borderlining on just impossible. So just remember that when you're trying to build your character. Okay, now before we get into the actual gameplay loop or a bit of like an advanced combo or advanced tactics when it comes to playing Ghandagoza, let's talk about this bar here, because as you can see, this is your Eternal Rage bar, or this Eternal Rage gauge, and basically how you increase or you gain max stats of this so you can do a max hit when it comes to your Raging Fist is through your skills and through combos. If you do a normal attack combo but you don't time it perfectly, you get 5 rage. If you do land things in perfect time and you have like the little like shine around your character as you time out your combo properly, you get 7 rage. If you do the combo perfectly in air, you gain 5 rage. Link attacks will yield you 3 rage. The Eternal Rage skill itself will give you 10, and True Avidya will also give you 3 should you end up taking that. Now, an important thing to notice about the rage gauge, as you're about to see in a second, if you don't end up hitting after 4 seconds, it just immediately starts straining and then disappears. So keep that in mind when you're trying to keep up your gauge. It is kind of similar to the way that a lot of characters in this game work, where you need to be constantly hitting, being in a flow of combo booster or damage uptime. Otherwise, stuff like Ares, stuff like Ghandagoza's Eternal Rage will just fall off. Now, if you didn't catch what I just mentioned, you can actually do aerial combos to gain rage. And since you do gain 5 rage from timing it perfectly, and it is a little bit easier to cancel things in the air, you can actually incorporate a lot of aerial combos into your general damage pattern, and that'll help dish out a lot more damage than if you were just staying on the ground. Now, in all honesty, perfecting this combo and getting everything perfect is really quite tough, and I do have a Ghandagoza 41.3 mil parse to kind of show you guys. Credit to JDdDee, because again, he is definitely a much better Ghandagoza player than I am. But just take a look at like the kind of combos and strings that he does. He gives himself this early rage. He starts building up his stacks very quickly. He's canceling the otherwise really long and tedious process of getting Eternal Rage stacks, and you know, with his perfect combo or specifically when he punches, he gets a max damage Eternal Rage hit super early, and then starts using his aerial combos to once again fill up the Eternal Rage hit. Between each of his combos, he is of course stacking his skills, and since he is literally just going to town on the dummy, you can see that his damage is kind of just through the roof. This is like nearing numbers that you would kind of expect from other characters. Now, although we are pretty much like at the last couple seconds of the score dummy kind of run, you'll notice that he is actually completely out of skills, but he does get to reapply his buff, and you're about to see like a really insane thing for a score dummy run, which is literally he gets to use his SBA skill in 60 seconds without any help of anyone, without any other random things. He literally just has, again, a score dummy run with his ultimate, and that lands him at the 41 mil mark, which is beyond anything that I really would have expected from a typical character score attack 60 second. I've done it now on Ares, I've done it on characters like Narmaya and stuff, done it on characters like Catalina, I've done it on characters like Lancelot, and even Yodarha. I've never even gotten close to using my ultimate in one of these runs, which really does solidify just how crazy Ghandagoza is. But if you just want to look through again like some of the combos or the strings that he's doing, every single hit is a perfect hit. He very frequently will start like dropping his character or will throw his character into the sky, doing aerial combos. He weaves his skills in perfectly. He's still gaining rage while in the sky, which is really helpful. And again, so long as you end up hitting the max damage cap for Eternal Rage, or once you start hitting 10 stacks for Eternal Rage, it basically means game over for the dummy. And look at it. I mean, like, the damage is absolutely absurd. absurd. We're doing 41 mil damage in 40 seconds. What is that? What even is that? Again, credits to JD for that Ghandagoza showcase. But in terms of actually perfecting the runs and getting your aerial combos and your ground combos in at the same time, this is one of the most complex or difficult looking characters to get things perfect on, because not only are you perfectly timing everything the way that you would literally have to for someone like Yorarha's dash 13 hit skill, you also have to sometimes just bounce between being on the ground and the air, all while weaving your skills in between and being able to get out your combos perfectly. It's a really tough character, but if you do invest in learning how to play the character, very, very worth it. Now, for our final tips and tricks, although you did just see the score attack, there are some things that you should know just about dodge canceling and to kind of explain some of the things that happen in the fight. Again, using aerial combos are really important, but also the importance of dodge cancel, especially at the start of the run, cannot be understated. Ghandagoza's normal attack kind of pattern that you see here is a little bit slow and sometimes just not worth it in terms of, like, you know, waiting and getting to the point where you start doing a lot of damage. So dodge canceling when you can is really important, but just keep in mind that although, again, you can hit, start dodging, time things perfectly, dodge again, and again, kind of see like the shine amongst all your moves, it is worth noting that how often or how frequently you will be able to do the dodge cancel is kind of dependent on the fight or if you're fighting the target dummy, but it's definitely less realistic to actually do this in a fight where the boss is moving around constantly as opposed to just, you know, being in the score dummy. Another thing that you can do should you decide to do it is actually replace your first punch in your combo with Iron Shoulder. It does also sometimes lead into a easier dodge combo, and again, with this character there are a bunch of kind of cancels and kind of different ways to pivot or kind of build up your stacks, because again, you have loads of ways to build rage, but ultimately play for comfort and play to kind of the bosses that you're fighting, because unfortunately trying to follow a specific set of combos or a specific rotation when the boss can just run around and fly away from you is really annoying and kind of just impossible. But so long as you're trying to do your dodge cancels, maintaining damage uptime, and ultimately just landing a 10 stack Raging Fist, you'll be fine with Ghandagoza. He's really interesting and I definitely think people are sleeping on him. Thanks so much though, guys, for watching this Vern character kind of go to town. Ultimately, he is kind of one of the funniest characters that I've ever seen a mod for, and even though this guy is definitely a lot more big brain than I ever could have imagined, I really enjoy playing him. Thanks so much, guys, for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, make sure to like, comment, turn on the notification bell, subscribe. If you've been enjoying the guides or if you've been enjoying any of the content, feel free to check out the rest of my content via Twitch or YouTube, where I stream all this stuff, all my other socials. Thank you again for supporting me, guys. I really appreciate it. Hope to see you guys next time. Adios.